Thank you so much, Dee. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. This session I have been looking forward to for months. And it is just a profound privilege and delight to be on stage with two lionesses, right, of literacy, who are here to help us talk through some of the difficult and exciting conversations we need to have as a society, right, around freedom to read and literacy, and what we can do to work on this together. So I just want to start by, again, I've acknowledged that you're both, in your ways, champions to access to stories. Amanda, through your work in advocacy, as well as your memoir, That Librarian, The Fight Against Book Banning in America, and Megan, through your work connecting communities through literature. Can each of you share what first drew you to this work and what continues to motivate you?
Sure. So it was an accident. What had happened was I got the PhD, as she generously said in that intro. And if you've ever done that level of graduate work, you know that reading becomes a chore. And I realized at the end of the doctorate that I hated to read because I'd done so much of it that was nothing but just this tedium and this slogging through. And that broke my heart. My first word was read. We knew where this was going. So my husband says to me, there's this community literacy project. Why don't you go down there, volunteer a little bit, reading community with people, not in an academic setting, and see if you can get your love back. And I did, and it turned out I was really good at running community literacy projects, so now it's my job.
Great answer.
So I grew up a reader. My mom's a retired kindergarten teacher, and so I've always loved to read, and I just knew that one day that would be my field. And this is my 24th year as an educator, and somewhere along the way, I read, or I listened to the MLK quote, the "What is my life's blueprint" speech, where he says, do something to where nobody living, dead, or the unborn can do it any better. And so I'm very competitive, so I got that in my head. And I was like, I'm going to be the best I can be. So I've always advocated for libraries. That's just part of being a school librarian. That's what we do. We have to fight for funding in our jobs and things. But a few years ago, I went as a resident of my community to speak out against censorship attempts at the public library in the community where I was born and raised, been a library card holder since I was 5. And I became an accidental activist, I guess you could say. And so I just wanted to give a speech to protect my public library, and I was targeted and harassed, and I'm still being targeted and harassed, but I figured if they wanted to label me an activist, I was going to activate it on up, and they just didn't know what they were getting themselves into by targeting me, so that's how that happened.
That's definitely how it appeared to me when I read your book. And I will say, in That Librarian, you write very candidly about a backlash I can only describe as harrowing and inhumane, to amplify, that you faced standing up against censorship. What does it mean to you to fight for intellectual freedom? And how has your definition or work evolved since the events of your book?
If you had asked me a few years ago about intellectual freedom, I just would have said the right to read. Yeah. But now, over the past few years, we've seen that it's not just an attack on books and the stories and the authors and the characters, which it is. It's an attack to whole entire communities and peoples and the stories that they represent. But intellectual freedom is also protecting libraries. We see attacks on our libraries, both school and public. Our own governor has targeted libraries and librarians. U.S. representatives from Louisiana have targeted librarians and libraries. And, now we've seen with the current administration, we're seeing cuts to not only the U.S. Department of Education, which affects me as a school librarian, but huge funding cuts for the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So to me, and you could even go further and say the attack on the Smithsonian and the museums are attacks to archives. and knowledge. So to me, intellectual freedom is to fight for preserving history and speech and the right to think and read and learn without restraint.
I think that that's a terrific observation. Yeah, let's take a moment to. So Megan, with One Book, One New Orleans, you work to select works that speak to local issues and amplify underrepresented voices. How do you navigate conversations about the books themselves, which may be considered controversial in this community context?
So it's actually not been the books themselves that have gotten me in trouble. It's actually been the people to whom I'm giving books.
Interesting.
So we give out hundreds of free copies a year. And a lot of these books go into the jails and prisons. We're actually the largest supplier of free books to the Orleans Parish Jail. We give about 1,200 a year, give or take, to keep their library shelves stocked. And if you are giving books to incarcerated populations, someone's gonna have something to say. So we get a lot of flack on that. Sometimes we'll be able to engage in a conversation. If it's online and they're just coming for you, in the comments section, just delete and block and don't engage, because all that does is invite more coming for you, and it's silly. We're not doing that. That's not how I'm spending my day. But, a lot of the times, if I'm inside the jail, because I also go inside the jail and have book club with incarcerated readers. And I'm going in there and I get asked, oh, well, why aren't you doing kids groups instead of, talking to incarcerated men and women about books? Number one, in a jail, you have not been tried by a jury of your peers yet. Most of the time you're being held there while awaiting trial. So all of these folks in there are innocent. Why are we giving up on them? And number two, why not? If you have something to do, maybe you're, more likely to make good decisions while inside. So the story I always tell is a woman came to book club and she's visibly agitated. And she's like, about a half hour ago, I was gonna get in a fight. I was gonna swing on her. I still wanna swing on her. But if I swung on her, I'd be put in lockdown and I wouldn't have got to come to book club today.
Uh-huh.
That's why you do it.
That is the feeling, right? That is the point. In terms, though, of how you both and Megan, you talked about, again, ignoring the comments when you can, but can you both speak to a little bit the emotional and professional toll of defending access to books and knowledge in a time when libraries, educators, and literacy advocates are all increasingly under attack?
So the thing is, when what happened to me was I just went and gave a speech about censorship. That's all I did. It's, and there are people that will say otherwise. I mean, it was recorded. So I have the whole speech. But you risk having your life put in jeopardy. So I went to the public library in the town that I have grown up. I have lived there for all 46 years, and I went and spoke, and I just gave a censorship speech and said, let's follow library policy. Next thing you know, random people are saying on the internet that I'm teaching children how to perform sex acts and teaching, horrific things. And you could say, oh, well, it's just online. These people say these things to my face. I live in a very small town. I no longer can go grocery shopping. I still don't. My daughter's a senior in high school. And she has a play coming up. She's in theater, and she has a play coming up next Friday. And I'm already dreading having to go. And I shouldn't have to dread going to see my child in her senior play. But I'm dreading it because there's going to be people that follow me around and take pictures and videotape me and say awful things like God's going to wrap a millstone around my neck and drown me in the pits of hell for the crime of speaking up for my public library. And so it's very dystopian times that we're living in, that you can't even go promote your public library without being called a groomer or a pedophile. It speaks volumes to the hate that we're seeing right now in our country. And I used to think it was like a southern state problem or a red state. No, in the past year I've traveled to over 30 different states to speak, and it happens in Manhattan and San Diego and Chicago. And so it's an everywhere issue that you will see that if anyone goes to speak publicly, in a forum about promoting literacy or libraries, you run the risk of becoming a target of extremists. And in my case, they haven't stopped. It's been 2.5 years. They have pictures of me on their desk. Like they do these weird video rants about me that make no sense. Apparently I'm Antifa. I didn't know that. And they have pictures of me. They give my address online, and so it's very difficult, especially when people you've known your whole life. Like the lady who taught me kindergarten called me a groomer online, so, but there comes a point in your life where you have to decide what you stand for. And I stand for libraries, and I stand for freedom to read and literature. And so, if that's what happens for me standing up for libraries, well, I know I'm on the right side of history. So, yeah.
I do want to quickly interject, just in case any of you are library allies who are looking for some language around this. Libraries are overwhelmingly popular in the US. 2024 polls show that 85% of Americans love libraries, want to see libraries supported in whole. So if you're ever in a position to correct some folks on what is essentially a very fringe position that is getting more tread than it deserves, in my assessment, please do think about calling them out on something that is a very fringe and incorrect position, but I couldn't resist. Megan, can you talk a little bit about what your experience was like as you went into jails and talked with people around something that does feel essential to me and very foundational to a democracy?
Yeah, and I will just add on to what you're saying about libraries. There's that meme that goes around that I always think of. Libraries are the only place in the US where you can exist for free.
Yeah.
So yes, all the libraries, all the time, please. So my experience has been kind of the opposite of yours. I get people calling me up all the time saying, thank you so much, please bring me more books. And I'll pull up with a trunk full of books and you just see folks' faces light up. It is amazing how hungry folks are to read. And just providing an access point and putting a book in people's hands has become such a thing of joy for me that it overshadows any negative comments I get. Just here's a book, take it, love it, share it with your neighbor. I have a little free library in my house now, and I love seeing people go on my property. My dog hates it. I love it. And in terms of going into the jail, it's been really interesting to see not only how hungry folks are to read, but also some of the best conversations I've had about books, bar none, have been inside the jail. They know the page numbers, they're ready to talk, they're ready to challenge you. It's been a really amazing experience to see not only, the large numbers of people we have locked up, but also the minds we have locked up. And the way that just doing something like bringing a book can open those minds for an hour.
No, I think that's such a powerful point, particularly here in the state of Louisiana, right, where we have the incarcerated populations we do. Books are freedom, right? Reading is freedom, and we kind of lose track of that, I think, sometimes. So great point, Megan.
Lindsay,
I want
to say, so the doom and gloom that I was talking about was more in the community with the adults. I am a school librarian, and the children are fantastic. Yes. The kids love to read. And we're in this time right now where there's this renaissance of middle grade, because I'm a middle school teacher, this like reading renaissance of all of these great middle grade authors. And they particularly love graphic novels. So the artistry and the graphic novels that are being produced right now, the diversity and the types of stories. So my day job is glorious. It's the outside trying to fight for the public library, but the kids are all right. The kids are a lot better than their parents. I have hope for the future, and it's particularly in libraries, because I see kids run to the library in the morning before school. They can't wait to get, what's the newest Dog Man and all of that. So I do have hope for the future, and they are a lot more empathetic and understanding and open and accepting of others than the adults. So I did want to say it's not all doom and gloom for me.
No, I think that it's true that the work always gives you something back, but it is also a particularly demanding time to do this work. So I want to talk a little bit about the role and power of shared reading as a basis of community building. Megan, how have you seen a citywide reading initiative like One Book, One New Orleans serve to counterbalance efforts to suppress ideas? Can you share a moment when a community conversation around a book changed hearts or minds?
Yes. So I would say 2019 was a really powerful year for that for me. The book that we were doing was Vengeance by Zachary Lazar. So One Book picks one book every single year, and for 12 months, we have programming around the city focused on that one book. And so in 2019, we had a panel at the New Orleans Public Library, and it was Literacy as a Tool to Combat Incarceration, Part 2. Because Part 1 was with the scholars, Part 2 was with formerly incarcerated people who had gained literacy help while incarcerated. And one of them had started a nonprofit. And he was talking about his work getting jobs for formerly incarcerated folks. And a guy who was there for the free pizza, he was unhoused, said, "I'm not only unhoused, but I'm also jobless because I have a record." And the panelists said, "Come see me, I'll put you to work next week." That's the power of community reading and coming together around books. It changes not only hearts and minds, but it can change your real material positions in life for the better.
That's an amazing story. Amanda, your story is so personal. And when I was reading through it, I was struck over and over again because it's emblematic of what so many educators and librarians face. To your point, I've been having these conversations too, and it is not a red state thing, a southern thing. It is everywhere. How do you translate individual acts of resistance into broader community action? Because that was what was so powerful in your text, was your ability to sort of galvanize allies.
Oh, so I'm very fortunate. I'm very privileged, and which is why I speak out. Because when you are named something like the School Library Journal National School Librarian of the Year, that gives you a platform. And so to me, when you have a platform, if you don't use it for something, it's a waste of a platform. And I was lucky enough to hear author Samira Ahmed say that we should always use our power and privilege for purpose. So I feel so strongly about it, I got it tattooed on my wrist. At a school librarian conference, it was in the same venue. We were having our National School Librarian Conference. But so I'm lucky enough that I had connections and I had people that I could rely on. And so what I do now is I know how to do it. So I try to turn around and help other people do the same thing. And so we're seeing a lot of people are being attacked. The director of the St. Tammany Parish Library is constantly being attacked. So the St. Tammany residents formed the St. Tammany Library Alliance. Lafayette library directors and librarians are being attacked, so they formed Lafayette Citizens Against Censorship. And we all kind of got together and founded together Louisiana Citizens Against Censorship to help people understand that, we might just be one person, but together we're, I don't want to say army because then they start saying I'm militant, but I guess it's kind of like the movie The Bug's Life, where the ants decide, they finally realize if they banded together, they could defeat, and so each one of us has the power and ability to make change. You just have to find your people to help you and give you support, and we're out there. But I think everybody, even if you're scared to physically speak out at something like the legislature, you can go to the legislature and fill out a card against a bill, an anti-library bill, and voice your opposition. You can send emails. Last year we had 9 anti-library bills in the Louisiana legislature, and we defeated 7.5 of them. Yeah. I like, not officially 8 because they slid in an amendment on one at the end, but we defeated it. And they said in the legislature, one of the legislators said, I got 400 emails against this bill and only 2 for it. And we looked at, with Louisiana Citizens Against Censorship, we had collectively, through Louisiana Library Association and our grassroots organizations and everything, we collectively sent 44,000 emails to the legislature last year.
Wow.
And cross fingers, so far we haven't had any anti-library bills filed. They have until April 4th. By this time last year, they had filed 9.
Wow.
Right now they filed 0. So maybe they don't want the smoke anymore. I don't know. But it's the power of each person collectively using the power to email and call and speak up for what's right.
It was really inspiring. It was really inspiring as someone who had recently come to New Orleans to see how organized this community is around this. So it's something I want to say to all of you who are in this room. Many of you are locals. It is a real pleasure to be in a town and a state that loves reading this much. And that is the thing that we should not lose track of either. So I want to pivot a little and talk about strategy and storytelling in the future, because I do think that there's a lot of bright spots on the horizon, even though we're in a pretty challenging time. Storytelling is a particularly powerful tool. And what stories, fictional or real, have helped shape your approach to the work? How do you use narrative to shift public perception of policy?
You want to go? Well, I find that we all have nostalgia for a certain book that we grew up reading. So mine is Judy Blume or Flowers in the Attic. And see, it gets you all laughing. And so you all start thinking about Flowers in the Attic and you start thinking, what is my book? What was the book I grew up reading and what did I? And that's how you get people hooked into talking about it. That's what I do with a lot of people that will tell me, the libraries are evil and the librarians are trying to give kids porn and whatever these lies. And I'll say, oh, what was the library like when you were growing up? And what was your favorite book? And what was your favorite story? Oh, I remember Miss So-and-so used to read. And that's how you get them hooked in with nostalgia. And you say, that's what libraries still are. It's not this thing that's in the social media that these people are making it out to be. But I think about stories like The Bonesetter's Daughter and The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. Or I think of Alice Walker's The Color Purple. What kind of person would I be had I not read those? What kind of person would I have been had I not read Iggy's House by Judy Blume? I grew up in an all-white neighborhood, and I never thought about what it would be like to be the only Black family in a neighborhood. And I recently got to talk to Judy about Iggy's House, and I didn't know she doesn't like that book. She's like, that was my first book. I could have done it better. But to me, it was the greatest book ever, and I learned a lot. So literature shapes us in the way we are, but that's how you hook people. You bring them in, ask them what book they liked to read when they were little, and that's how you get them talking.
I think that's a great point. Megan, do you have particular stories that you return to?
Ooh, okay. So I would say probably about once every 3 or 4 years, I reread Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. Single best last line in all of literature, fight me, you can't. If you surrendered to the air, you could write it. Yeah, still to this day. So every 3 or 4 years, I come back to that one just because that language is so incredibly powerful. And I remember it was the first time I said those words could literally reach out of the page and grab you by the arm. And how do you not come back to that book that changed your life over and over again? The other one that I really love is The Hours by Michael Cunningham. And I got to meet him yesterday and tell him that reading his book switched me from a pre-med to an English major. Thank you, Michael Cunningham. And my mom now says she's a doctor, but not the kind that helps people. Thanks, Ma. But no, in all seriousness, and my mom's story is actually really powerful as well. And I tell this one a lot when I think about my work in adult literacy and trying to get books into the hands of particularly adults who don't have access to books. So my mom actually dropped out of high school for family reasons. Still the number one reason people drop out of high school, by the way. It's not because they weren't good at school. It's family obligations. And later on, she went back and she got that GED, and seeing the way that her getting that GED then set the trajectory for me to get a PhD and then my sister to get a law degree really did help me think about what would it be like if there were literacy advocates all over the place who could tell folks in that GED program, hey, stick with it. You're going to make this change for not only your life, but also your children's lives and your children's children's lives. Because now my kids think that walking around talking to authors is normal. I met my first author when I was 19 years old and I was starstruck. So the way that, literacy just changes your life and your family's life for generations cannot be overstated.
No, I so strongly agree with this. Yesterday we had a session where Bernice McFadden, who is an absolutely extraordinary writer, who has a recent book out that is living in my mind full time. It's a memoir, but it's also a memoir of her whole family. It's called Firstborn Daughters, and she was talking about how she tells these stories like she heard them, right? And she passes them along and she puts them together. And that aspect of when you put it on the page, but also when you share it is so critically important. And I couldn't help but be struck and just remember every time I picked up a book and it affirmed me, right? Every time I opened the page and it was there for me. It's so crucial and vital and human, And so I think that is part of what this festival is about, and it's part of what you're both describing. So thank you for sharing that with me and with us, all of us. Amanda, now that your book is out in the world, what are you hoping that readers, and especially fellow librarians, parents, and students will take from it?
So I wrote the book mostly because part revenge, because I just wanted to stick it to them, because the best revenge is success.
Quick interjection that I love a revenge story, and one of the first books I fell in love with was this account of Monte Cristo, and I felt that in your book.
It's they're really super angry that I had a book and that it's a national bestseller, and they're going to be really super angry when it's announced that someone bought the film rights to it. But I wrote it for several reasons. First and foremost, I'm not my story's not unique. This is happening to thousands of librarians all across the United States. I'm contacted almost daily by someone. I was contacted 2 hours ago by someone. This is happening to me. I read your story, and they tell me it made me stand strong. And so if you can do it, I can do it. And I wrote it for librarians, but I also wrote it for people like my parents. And that's a sore subject. But I wrote it for people like my parents who are MAGA and my parents raised me when we were growing up, Southern Baptist Republican, that we were raised, God is love, love thy neighbor as thyself, be a good Samaritan, and that the Constitution was key. And that people will say, I've changed. My parents will say I've changed. Apparently I caught the woke mind virus. But I'm still the person that they raised me to be. I'm not the one that changed. And so I wrote this for people like my parents who do believe in the First Amendment and the freedom to read, but who have gotten caught up in hate and vitriol, and in the hopes that they will maybe stop and think, to maybe not believe everything that they see on social media and to believe everything that they see on Fox News.
And just because we are at Bookfest, and part of the reason I asked these two amazing women to come and speak to us, when you're selecting books, Megan, what criteria or values guide the decision making? Is it a group process? How do you balance literary merit, accessibility, and timeliness?
That's a great question, and it's one of the ones that I get asked about One Book, One New Orleans all the time. What's the selection process for that one book that you form community around all year long? So the first thing we do, it's a multi-step process. We'll ask the community for suggestions, and anyone can suggest, just write to us, make a comment on social media. From there, we bring it down to make sure that everything suggested is available in paperback. We will never do a book that is not, because hardback books are contraband in every carceral facility in the United States. So in order to get books into jails and prisons, they have to be paperback. So if it's available in paperback and it's also in print, we've had a couple people suggest out of print books, then our board will sit down with 50 plus suggestions one year if needed, and we will go through, and what we look at is is it telling a story about our community in a way that people would recognize? Because if you're bringing folks together around a shared reading experience, it helps when they can see themselves. We'll generally narrow it down to about 3, and from there, we have a selection committee, and they make the final decision. So it's not me, it's not the Megan Show, it's not One Book, One New Orleans Board of Directors, it's the community. So we will ask our partners. We always have a representative from the public library on that committee. We have someone from WHRBA Reading Radio, because they record that one book and they get the book into the ears of the blind and print handicapped. So they might say something like, oh, well, this would record really well, and we think our listeners would like this book. Or this would record really poorly. Oh, no, please don't. We'll also ask some folks who teach adult ed programs, because we develop a curriculum for that one book, and we get the book and the curriculum into adult ed programs. It's being used right now in 7 different adult ed programs to teach adults to read. So we'll have someone who teaches in those programs just to make sure it would be accessible for their students. We also ask some community readers, right? If you've been volunteering with one book, we may ask you to be on that committee. And we also will have someone from the jail library, if we can get them. They're overworked, so it's hard. To just say, this would really reach the population in here. And so we're really trying to form that selection based on community stakeholders and make it be a community selection process that then brings everyone together.
I love that you bake it in from the beginning. So, ladies, I'm going to close out our section so that we can open it up to other questions. But you've given us a lot of points that, to me, point to opportunities, right? Gave me a lot of hope personally. What can people, whether they're readers, educators, or just concerned citizens, do to get involved and help in some of these conversations?
Well, if you want to get involved with helping in Louisiana to protect our libraries, you can go to our Louisiana Citizens Against Censorship website, and you can sign up for our newsletter. Our executive director, Lynette Mejia, is constantly sending out updates, and you never know, your parish might pop up. There might be a call to action or a bill or something that needs to be done, but you can look at that. But what you need to do is you need to attend library board meetings and school board meetings, and because what we're seeing, and this is not just in Louisiana, this is across the United States, is that people are really sneaky. And before you know it, people have taken over these boards of control. And before you know it, they've slipped in legislation that is anti-library to defund. And then, by that time, you're having to be reactive. So you want to be proactive and pay attention. You want to vote. Make sure you always vote. I know, I gotta run home and finish.
You're gonna make it. You're gonna make it.
Run home and vote. I try. I was late this morning. But you vote, and if you see a petition that says contact, like right now there's one going around to save the Institute of Museum and Library Services to contact Cassidy because he's on that committee. Fill that email out. Fill that form out. Fill those forms. Call your legislators, local governing boards. Just pay attention. But yeah, sign up for our newsletter. We'll put you to work.
I'll echo that. Vote. Today is election day in Louisiana. If you've not voted yet, there's still time. I think the polls close at 8 p.m. Is that correct?
That's what I know. Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. And another thing to really think about in terms of voting is the fact that a community's literacy level is directly tied to its citizens' participation in the democratic process. So basically, the more literate citizens you have, the more likely they are to vote. So thinking about the ways in which literacy and language and access to those things are tied to power is something that we all need to do. In terms of getting involved with One Book, One New Orleans, onebookOneNOLA.org. And you can also follow us on Facebook and Insta. And this week, Blue Sky, I promise I'm gonna make the account.
Great answers, team. So again, get involved, but we have about 6 minutes now. If you have questions for our 2 amazing presenters today, if you do have questions, I ask that you come up and take that microphone so it'll be recorded, but feel free to ask the questions you have about what it comes, we're in an era of unprecedented misinformation and censorship, right? But we also have a lot of opportunities to come together. And I hope that's what you heard today. But if you have any questions on those topics, I know that they are eager for them.
And I have no filter, so you can ask me.
She
whatever.
sure, like, it is part of the reason I knew she would be like fire on this panel, and she has been, so.
So there's a clear correlation between red states and like literacy rates and education rates. And I was just wondering what you guys are seeing in the world right now that are either affecting the literacy rates or the education rates in states positively or negatively throughout the US under the current political climate of the world right now.
I'll say what I'm seeing is that states that have higher literacy rates are passing Freedom to Read Acts in their state legislature, and states that have lower literacy rates are filing anti-library bills, and that directly correlates to me in my mind. And then if you look at boards of education, like state boards of education, you look at states where the reading rates are higher, they have school librarians in every school. Mm-hmm. That's, to me, a big indicator.
Just to chime in a little on that last topic, we lost more than 30,000 school librarians, not just under this past administration, but within the past 2 decades. And when you think about the impact on young readers, it's high, right? So again, that's where staying engaged at the local level, I would say, is so important. Megan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we look at the data from PEN America, they, by the way, do an amazing job tracking book bans, book banning bills. There was, I think, an 800% increase in book banning efforts in the 2022-2023 school year. So, and a lot of those are disproportionately happening in red states. Shocker. So looking at where the book banning bills are being filed is definitely one of the things that we can do to track that. But also, I think we have to think about worldwide. The number one indicator of a child's eventual reading level is the reading level of its mother. So thinking about the fact that in these states where these things are being banned, it's probably going to be that way for their kids as well, right? And how do we change those things proactively before it gets to the point where, you know, essentially high or low literacy levels are being passed down?
And I'll add, you know, I keep going back to the fact that the Institute of Museum and Library Services is under attack right now from the current administration. And people keep saying, oh, it's not a big deal because libraries are funded locally. But libraries are supplemented by that federal grant money, and Louisiana gets 2.7-ish million, the state library per year from that organization, from that government entity. And the money is used for summer reading and literacy, and also broadband and services in rural communities, which tend to have lower literacy rates. It's all connected. And you think about, why is this happening? Well, a dumber society is an easier led society. And what we're seeing is a further divide of the have and have-nots. Mm-hmm. And that correlates with literacy. It's the readers and the, you know, it's all connected. My mom's like, that's conspiracy. No, it's all connected.
And piggybacking on that for one more second, the way that carceral facilities predict eventual needs is they actually look at third grade reading levels to predict the number of beds a jail or prison will need 20 years out.
And the school to prison pipeline is a real thing.
Yeah.
You know, the school to prison pipeline, I mean, you look at literacy rates and populations where you have low literacy rates, it's higher incarceration rates too,
Yep.
so.
Oh, and another stat on that. I could do stats all day, y'all. Another stat on that is that so they don't do these on the state level, but on the federal level, about 67% of incarcerated people are low literate. And of those 67%, more than half had undiagnosed learning disabilities. Mm-hmm. So if you can get that literacy help while incarcerated and get that diagnosed, you actually have a better chance of not going back to jail or prison when you get out.
So I think we have time for one more question, and I thought I saw some, yeah, head on up.
Thank you guys so much. I'm so glad I came here. This is so interesting. So 2 things came to mind, and I don't even know if this is something that anybody can do about it. And one of them is laws on slander, because this is happening a lot, where people just make shit up, and then it gets picked up by a troll, and then it just goes on. And it's happened with what you're describing, and this is really, really bad, because people go around, even intelligent people, thinking that this stuff is true. They have no clue that it's all made up by some 15-year-old internet troll or 35-year-old internet troll, whatever the case may be. It's all made up. That was one. And this may not be able to be discussed here, the laws on that we have to do something. Number 2 is, oh shit, did I forget
I can
it?
answer that. I can answer that first one.
Okay.
I'm in 2 current lawsuits right now that I filed, not against me. Defamation lawsuits for one is locally in Louisiana and one is against a man in New Jersey. So the laws for defamation are very hard to prove. I found out I was the first school librarian to file a defamation lawsuit against someone, like the nature of this, this case. I don't want to get too much into it, but the reason why I filed is because I do have a privilege and I can enable him to do this. So I'm hoping to set a court precedent so that other people will stop doing this. But we've seen other librarians and educators across the United States that have also filed. There's another one in New Jersey. There's one in South Carolina. So as soon as these get on the books and we set precedent, I think we'll see a lot of this die down, hopefully. If we win, I mean,
Awesome. And my excitement in that first question, I think made me forget my second question, but that to me is such a huge thing is that right there. And thank you guys so much. And I can't wait I wrote these down to help and participate. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining today's session. Remember to sign up for the websites, get the newsletters, show up for the meetings, and thank you for showing up today. Thanks again to our amazing panelists.
And thank you, Lindsay, for being a wonderful moderator.
yes. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Megan. And I'll be over signing books if anybody wants to come.